Hello, crafty friends. Welcome back to Jessie Kate Creates. I'm Jessica, and today's video is a little different because I'm going to be giving a little bit of a review of some products that I recently picked up at the Dollar Tree. And actually, let me just show you. I picked up some stamps. And I know Dollar Tree has had stamps for a long time, but I've never really loved their stamps. Like, the designs and the sentiments haven't ever really spoken to me before. But I was in there the other day picking up some stuff for a little project at my house, and I saw these stamp sets and I thought they were gorgeous. They have much finer lines and they just look a little bit more, I don't know, mature than the stamps that I usually see at the Dollar Tree. So I figured, you know what, for $1.25 a piece, I'm gonna pick up these designs and give them a try and see what they're like, because like I said, I've seen stamp sets at Dollar Tree before, but I've never used them before. And I think, I mean, look at all the fine lines there. So I'm gonna be completely honest, I picked these up thinking that they were probably gonna be a letdown, and I was pleasantly surprised, kind of. There's definitely a letdown in here, but we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so I did some test stamping. I recorded it, but it ended up being like an hour long, and I figured you probably didn't want to see all that. So I'm just gonna get right into the results. So for a lot of these, I stamped with Memento, Tuxedo black ink, and VersaFine Pigment ink. I also stamped some with some Concord and Ninth inks. I mainly used grapefruit. I think I might have used one other color. So these are the things that I stamped with, okay? And I did all of my stamping onto 80-pound white cardstock, okay? Now these stamps, it's pretty obvious that these are just, you know, they're cheapy acrylic stamps, which means a lot of times with these types of stamps, ink beads on them instead of laying flat, so it can be hard to get a good crisp impression. So that's what I was expecting from these. But I was really pleasantly surprised. So the first thing I stamped out was this sentiment, okay? First, I stamped it with Memento dye ink. And these are the first 4 stampings that I did. You can see the more you stamp it, it kind of stamps a little bit better. This is the last, this was the first one. This is the last one. You can see it definitely stamps better. But do you see how it's not smooth, how it's all those tiny little balls and beads of ink? That's because when you have that slick acrylic surface, it's really hard for the ink to grab onto the stamp and lay flat. So cheapy acrylic stamps usually stamp best with pigment ink, because the pigment ink is better able to grab onto the surface and stamp smooth. So this second row I stamped with the VersaFine black pigment ink. Oh, I got some pencil marks on there, sorry guys. But you can see the actual lines of the sentiment themselves are so much smoother and crisper. Like, let's just compare these two. This was the dye ink, and you can see it's all kind of beaded up. This is the pigment ink, and you can see that for the most part it's stamped nice and smooth. Now, one thing I will say, my stamp did have an imperfection. You'll notice on all the stampings, there's a little gap in the H. That's just because the stamp had a little, it's not supposed to have that gap in it. It's an imperfection, but for $1.25, I am perfectly happy with having that tiny little gap in my stamp. Okay. And then lastly, I stamped out the sentiments with some Concord and Ninth dye ink in Sorbet. And I would say these were pretty good. This stamped way better than I was expecting it to. It could be because I'd used the stamp a few times now, so it was a little bit more seasoned and it could hold the ink better. But this stamped pretty good. Not as great as the pigment ink, but definitely not as bad as the first few stampings I did with the Memento. So I was super duper happy with how the sentiments stamped out. And this was true for all the sentiments in all 3 sets. They stamped best with the pigment ink, but they did all right with the 2 dye inks. Okay. Now, one thing I am going to show you, and I know some people are going to call this like sacrilege and say to never do it. When I have cheap acrylic stamps that I cannot get to stamp well, I will take a little emery board that you use for your nails, and I will very lightly file the surface of the stamp so that it stamps better. Don't do this to your good stamps. Do not do this with the stamps that you pay good money for. But if you have a stamp that's cheap enough that you wouldn't miss it if you ruined it, you can try this to get it to stamp better, okay? I'm gonna say that one more time. Do not use this trick on your good stamps. Only use this for the cheapy acrylic stamps that you wouldn't be upset if you ruined, okay? Now, I've been doing this mostly since I started stamping, because when I first started out, I only bought the cheapy stuff. But all you do, you take your stamp, I usually put it on a block first. I take the smoother side and just very lightly drag your emery board across it. I am not applying a lot of pressure at all. But what that does is it just adds a little bit of texture and grip to the surface so that your stamp can better grip your ink. So you can try that if you want. You don't have to. Another trick is you can try rubbing your stamp on your skin, and that helps sometimes, but I feel like you have to continually do that. Whereas if you use the emery board, you really only have to do it like the one time. So if you want to try it, try it. Just, you know, it can mess up your stamps if you're not careful. So again, don't do it with your nice stamps. Only do it with the stamps that you wouldn't mind destroying if you did it wrong. Okay, I'm just gonna put that disclaimer out there. Okay, so that was this first stamp set. Oh, and I do want to show you, I did do that trick to this sentiment. So these are the ones I stamp unsanded, and you can see they look pretty good for the most part. I would not mind using any of these images on a card product, but I do think they stamped a little bit better, and the lines were a little finer. Like you can see how blown out that is versus how fine these lines I was able to get when I did sand my stamp. So that's up to you whether or not you want to try it. Just, you know, be careful if you do it. Only do it with cheapy stamps you wouldn't mind getting rid of if you mess them up. Don't do it with your good stamps, guys. Okay, so sentiments, fantastic job. Next, I wanted to see about the images, because these have a lot of really detailed, fine lines. And I was pretty certain that these were going to stamp horribly. Like, I did not have a lot of faith in this stamp set, but it only cost me $1.25. So I wasn't too pressed about it. But y'all, I stamped these out. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So I stamped this little floral arrangement out. Look at this. This is the first time using the stamp out of the package, and look at how well it did with all of these fine lines. I did stamp this with the Pigment ink, and it, right from the package, first stamping. I did use my Misty for that, I should say. I had a feeling that I'd need to stamp this multiple times, so I did use my Misty, and I stamped this down 2 times. But still, right out the package, I think this is gorgeous. Like, look at all those fine lines. Look at how well that did. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. So once I stamped it with the Pigment ink, then I went ahead and I also tried stamping it with the dye ink. You can see not quite as perfect. The lines aren't quite as crisp. And this one, I didn't do anything to the stamp. I didn't rub it on my hand. I didn't sand it. Just, again, just stamped the stamp as it came in the package. And you can see the lines aren't quite as crisp as they were with the Pigment ink, but I don't think it did a terrible job. You know, like I would use this on a project. So this is the Pigment ink, this is the dye ink. So once again, the Pigment ink did better, but both inks did well enough that I think anyone receiving this would be happy. Where you can really tell the difference though between using Pigment ink and dye ink, look at these little, oh my gosh, I can't think of the word, dandelions. Do you see how fine all those details are with these? Look, you can see all the little lines and all the little puffs and dots. You lose that detail when you stamp it in the dye ink, but it's still recognizable enough that you can tell what it is. It's still totally usable. But I would definitely say if you have Pigment inks, you might want to use those instead of your dye inks. So that's that image. And then lastly, I tried out the Dragonfly. because this one, it came with like, it's a layered stamp. So you have the dragonflies and then you have the wing. And I was really curious how those were gonna do. So let's see. So I went ahead and I stamped these with some dye ink. This is the Memento. And I thought this did pretty well. Pretty well. It is not perfect, but I would be happy to use either of these images on a stamp. And then I also tried it out with some dye ink from Concord and Ninth. Again, not perfect, but still a really, really good impression. Okay. And then here, this is what it looks like when I stamped it with the VersaFine pigment ink. So you can see the difference here. It is much crisper with the pigment ink here. The lines are not quite as clean, not quite as nice down here with the pigment ink, or with, I'm sorry, with the dye ink. But I think both of these are good enough that I would use either one of them on a project and be completely happy with it, okay? Now down here, oh, I didn't mark, I should have marked. This is dye ink, you guys. So down here, I stamped it with the dye ink, and then I used the coordinating stamp, this one here, to fill in the wings. I thought this looked pretty good. I thought it stamped pretty well. The only thing I will say is that this was very clearly designed to go with the right side of the wings, and they didn't give you one for the left side of the wings. So you kind of just have to turn it upside down and stamp it. And it does okay, but it's not like, do you see here how the line of the image matches the line of the wings? And then here I had to turn it upside down, so it's not exactly perfect. I still think it works because the stamp kind of goes outside of the line, so it kind of looks like it's meant to be that way, but I kind of wish we'd just gotten either that the stamp had less of a curve to it so you could use it with both sides a little better, or that we had gotten two of these. But for $1.25, I'm happy with this all day. I will take it for $1.25. Okay, so that was this first stamp set. None of these have names because they're from the Dollar Tree. It's just clear stamps. But so this was the one with the dragonflies. Love, love, love it. Would definitely, would purchase again. Would purchase again. And I'm excited to use these on some projects. Okay. Next, we have this stamp set. Again, I think it's gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. And I love the sentiments in this. I didn't talk about that with the other stamp, but they were great there too. But such happy news. Best of luck. Stay wonderful. You're the nicest. Missed you. So glad we're family. Like, there's so many different cards that you could use this on, these sentiments on. So I think these are great. And I love how, like, fancy and, you know, sophisticated and classy the font is on all of these stamps. So for this one, I decided to test out the images because here you can see they kind of use that like half-tone pixelated design so that it looks like your images are shaded. And I was really curious how well that was going to translate when you stamped these out. So I stamped these flowers and this little bee right here. I stamped out these two. I do not know what type of flowers these are. If you know, put them in the comments below, but I think they're gorgeous. Aren't they? So lovely. So here I stamped the images out. These first three flowers and bees I stamped with Memento, and these were the first 3 times that I used this stamp. And you can see each time you stamp it, it gets a little bit better as the stamp gets a little bit more used and conditioned. On this one, I didn't sand it. I didn't rub it on my hand, nothing, just stamped it right out of the package. And I thought these looked really good. And then for the 4th time, I stamped it with the pigment ink. So here we have dye ink, here we have pigment ink. And it's no surprise that the pigment ink stamped the best. And again, it's just because pigment ink is better able to coat the surface of slick acrylic stamps than dye ink is. And I'm so happy with how this came out. I think it's gorgeous. Again, I would use these images on a project. I think they are beautiful and I think they stamped really well. I was surprised by how well the shading translated when I stamped everything out. So here are the bees up close. I hope you can see how well those stamped, and then the flowers as well. So that was the second stamp set. Super duper happy with how this one did as well. Now, let's move on to the last stamp set here. I was super curious about this one because it also has that kind of halftone pixelated design so that it's supposed to look shaded when you stamp it. And when I stamped out this stamp set, I was really happy with how that turned out. So I was skeptical, but I had some good hopes going in, and I'm gonna tell you, this stamp set let me down. The images in here stamped terribly. Like they're not good. So let me show you. Let me show you my little samples over here. Okay, so this is the flower stamped out with Memento dye ink. These are the first 3 stampings. It looks better on camera than it does in person, but I would not put this on a project, me personally. I'm not happy with how this turned out. I think it's hard to tell what it is, and it did not stamp evenly. I will also say for this one, I used a Misty, so I stamped it multiple times, and even stamping it multiple times, I think this looks terrible. Not happy with it at all. So I thought, okay, maybe this is one where using a pigment ink really makes a difference. With all the other stamps we've done so far, you can totally get away with using a dye ink instead of a pigment, and it still works out pretty well. So I thought maybe this one, it just really needs to be pigment ink. So I stamped it out using my Misty with some VersaFine pigment ink. It is better, I will say that. It is better than the Memento, but I still personally don't like how this looks. I wouldn't use this on a project. I don't think it looks cute. I don't know. I just don't like it. Now, maybe it's a stylistic thing. If you are looking at this and you're thinking, oh my gosh, that's my style. I love that. I know exactly how I want to use it. Do you go pick this up and use it on a project? But for me personally, I just wasn't happy with how this looked. And then I thought, okay, well, this is like shades of black and gray. So maybe if we stamp it with some color, then it will really shine, okay? So I pulled out the Concord and Ninth dye ink. I used the color Sorbet. I stamped this out. I still don't like it. Again, could just be a personal style thing. But to me, it is really hard to tell what this is supposed to be. Again, I think it looks better on camera than it does in person, but I wasn't personally happy with this. Okay, so then I thought, well, maybe some of the other images will stamp out a little bit better. So I gave that a go, and still very unhappy with it. This is, what is this? I think this is with the Memento. It's a little bit easier to tell that this is supposed to be a flower, but I just don't like the way that this looks. I don't like the way it looks at all. I tried stamping it with my pigment ink. It is definitely a better impression, but I'm still not super happy with it. And then this is it in color with a dye ink. So I should have written that down. So this is my, okay, so now those are labeled. But yeah, and it could really just be a style thing. Like I said, I just might not be into the style of these stamps, but I feel like I've seen halftone floral stamps that look a lot better and a lot more impressive than these do. Okay, so not happy with any of the images in this stamp set. Now, with that being said, there are still some really great sentiments in this stamp set. Happy birthday, just a note, thank you, I like you, time for a happy dance. I love that. Time for a happy dance, sending a card instead of a text. I think all of these are great. I love these sentiments. And these the sentiments stamped just as well as the other sets. So you can see here, again, I didn't label anything, sorry. These are dye up top, and this is pigment down here. And you can see with the dye ink, it stamps okay, but you can still see some beading, and you can see that it's not like a smooth line. Whereas down here with the pigment ink, it is smooth and beautiful and even and crisp. So you can definitely, again, I would use these on a card. They look you know, they stamp well enough that you can totally use them. Very usable, even if all you have is dye inks. But if you have a pigment ink to stamp the sentiment, I'd say stamp it in a pigment ink because it's going to stamp a lot more crisp. Okay. I also tested that out with the happy birthday, and these stamped really nicely as well. So we have dye inks over here, not perfect. You can see some beading, but not bad. And then down here we have the pigment ink, which is, you know, wonderful, even, smooth, versus this one I stamped too hard, so ignore that one. But these, you can see the dye inks, they're not quite as smooth as over here with the pigment ink, but still really, really great. So here's what I would say about this last stamp set. If you like the sentiments, I think this stamp set is worth $1.25. Just know that you're probably not going to use the floral images because they don't stamp very well. But for $1.25, I think these sentiments are worth it. That's me personally. Because yeah, $1.25, I think this really adds some variety to sentiments in your stash. So that's my review of these stamps from the Dollar Tree. I think that they're lovely. They stamp significantly better than I expected them to. This one is easily my favorite. I love the sentiments. I love the images. They stamped well. So happy with this one all day long. This one, I think, again, the images are beautiful. The images stamped well, and I love, love, love. These are probably my favorite sentiments, so definitely would get this again. If you're new to stamping, or if you don't have any sentiments like this, I'd say go ahead, spend $1.25, pick it up. Honestly, I probably would have paid $1.25 just for this time to do a happy dance and this thank you alone. But that's just me. So for under $5, I got these 3 stamp sets. I think they're great. So let me know, is this something that you would pick up? Is this something that you would add to your stash? I'm really curious if you guys think these are worth it with how they stamped. Obviously, you know I do, but I'd love to hear your opinions too in the comments down below. So please let me know your thoughts on these stamps. Yeah, I will probably come out with another video soon using these to make a project, so keep an eye out for that. I really hope you found this video useful. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please go ahead and click the like button. It helps other people find my videos. And if you want to see all the videos I come out with, especially the one where I make a project with these, go ahead and click the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you're notified when I post new videos. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.